Night falls over the Amazon camp at the edge of a new empire. Fires fade, weapons scattered across the ground. Thousands of Gorgon prisoners bound tight between the tents. The Amazon warriors believe the war is over. In the darkness, hands move. Blades withdrawn from sleeping warriors, screams tear through the camp. Myrina wakes and reacts instantly. By dawn, every prisoner is dead. In her world, victory only ends when its consequences are controlled. These were not simple raids. From the beginning, Myrina built an army that operated like a nation. 30,000 infantry formed, the core force trained to hold positions, advance in unified formations, and break resistance city by city. 3,000 cavalry gave them range speed across open terrain, pursuit after collapse and withdrawal without loss. This was not legendary power. It was a professional expeditionary army operating in a world that didn't yet know how to stop them. Libya was not empty. It was crowded with peoples who already understood power. Riverine communities, fortified cities, and names older than Greece itself. Among them, none had greater influence than the Atlanteans. Diodorus called them the most civilized people of the region, city founders, keepers of ancestral beliefs, a society that believed itself eternal. Their capital, Cern, was not just a city. It was a declaration that order existed here and outsiders would either break it or bow to it. Myrina chose to break it. That decision mattered. A raid would only probe the perimeter, burn fields, then retreat. Instead, Myrina assembled her army in plain sight, marched in formation, and forced brutal engagement outside the walls. This was a statement to all who were watching. Amazon power does not hide. It arrives openly, enforces terms and stays. The Atlantean forces met her on the battlefield but failed. When the line collapsed, Myrina did not stop. She pursued the retreat into the city itself, pushing defenders back through their own gates, turning walls into traps. Cern fell not after a siege, but through momentum, through the refusal to let failure interrupt reorganization. What happened next was not chaos, but policy. Myrina ordered the city destroyed. Not looted, not occupied, erased entirely. Buildings burned, defenses demolished, women and children taken prisoner. This was done deliberately calculated for maximum power effect. Cern had to vanish so that no neighboring people could pretend neutrality. No rival city could believe walls alone guaranteed survival. This was the first lesson of the Amazon campaign. Resistance would not be answered with negotiation, but with disappearance. News traveled faster than armies. Across Libya, names now spoken with different meaning. Amazon warriors no longer imagined as wandering women with bows. They were understood as a force capable of coordinated assault, urban destruction, and population displacement. They could take cities, not just harass them. And they could stay. This distinction mattered more than any battle. In the ancient world, power was measured by endurance. Anyone can win a fight. Only states can absorb losses, hold territory, and decide who lives where afterward. After Cern, Myrina's Amazons were no longer regarded as a threat, but recognized as a political entity. But destruction alone cannot build empire. It only clears space. When the remaining Atlanteans sued for peace, they did so in fear, not dignity. Myrina accepted. This was not mercy. It was calculation. She imposed surrender with specific terms, then did something unexpected. She chose reconstruction. On the ruins of Cern, Myrina built a new city bearing her name. Survivors were resettled there. Captives integrated into the population. Administration replaced terror. Where once there was only warning, now there was new organizational structure. The message had changed but not softened. Myrina did not rule through endless massacre. She ruled by proving resistance led to destruction, and submission led to survival under rules she set. The Atlanteans responded appropriately. They organized public honors. They recorded her name. They treated her not as a passing conqueror, but as a ruler requiring recognition. Alliance replaced confrontation, not because Myrina had changed, but because she proved she didn't need to. This was the second lesson of the Amazon campaign. War is not the goal. Control is. From this point forward, Myrina's forces operated differently. Cities no longer waited to be tested. Some opened gates, others negotiated. The violence at Cern continued long after the fires died. Myrina had turned memory itself into a weapon. Her army adapted well. Infantry held conquered territories, while cavalry extended influence outward, scouting, securing routes, preventing regrouping. Speed kept forces from overextension. Discipline prevented internal fracture. Victory did not dissolve the structure that created it. This is where myth about Amazons usually breaks down. Later Greek stories depicted Amazon warriors as brave but doomed, fierce but disorganized, incapable of sustaining power. Myrina's campaign contradicted that image at every step. She did not rush into battle blindly. She escalated, consolidated, and institutionalized success. If she destroyed, it was to teach. If she forgave, it was to rule. The CERN incident was not her greatest act of violence. It was just the opening declaration. By choosing overwhelming force first, Myrina eliminated the need to repeat it elsewhere. The rest of Libya began adjusting their behavior accordingly, and somewhere beyond the immediate horizon, beyond the marshes of Tritonus, beyond coastal routes, other powers would soon hear the same message. The Amazon queen was not acting like a myth. She was acting like a state, and states don't stop at one city. Her homeland lay in what ancient writers called the edge of the inhabited world. Western Libya, near the towering Atlas Mountains, where land turned to marsh and water met the encompassing ocean. At the center was Hespera Island, rising from the Triton marsh. This was not a desert world. Diodorus described fruit trees, herds of giant goats and sheep, and a climate generous enough to sustain dense population without agriculture. Grain had not yet reshaped society here. No fixed harvest cycles, no dependence on fields that bound people in place. That ecological reality shaped everything. A society not dependent on grain could move. It could follow pastures. It could abandon land without collapsing. The Amazons of Libya grew up in a world where mobility was not a tactic but a way of life. War did not interrupt production. War became part of production. From that environment formed a social order that inverted Greek assumptions so completely that later writers could barely describe it without moral judgment. Women exercised power inherent to men, the heads of household. They held military and political authority. They served in fixed terms, commanded armies, administered territory. Men, conversely, were the stable rear responsible for family care. They stayed home, raised children, prepared food, obeyed their wives' commands. Infants were given to men for care and nurturing. Public life belonged to women, not symbolically but structurally. For Greek readers, the most shocking custom was also the most revealing. Girls endured breast cauterization to prevent full development. The purpose was clear: remove any physical limitation on archery, javelin throwing, or shield bearing. This was not ceremonial mutilation. It was industrial preparation. Female bodies were shaped for war because war was anticipated. The image of the elevated woman remained but bound by certain constraints. From this system came the name Amazon, later explained in Greek as without breast. The explanation may be linguistically flawed, but the obsession behind it is telling. Greek authors fixated on anatomy because they could not accept the basic reality: this was a society that trained women for violence as policy, not exception. To manifest their political power in the world, they accepted destroying the part of the female body that carried women's value. This was the dark side of power. Myrina was not an anomaly in this world. She was its product. What set her apart was not that she ruled, but how she ruled. She inherited a system already designed for expansion and applied it with discipline. Her genius lay in organizational capacity. She didn't need to create Amazon power. She needed to concentrate it. That concentration showed in everything she did. She didn't just lead a group. She commanded a force. She marched along rational routes, coastal corridors, rivers, open plains where cavalry could operate. She understood geography not just as landscape, but as barrier and opportunity. This is why later traditions tried to reduce her to a monster or a curiosity. Myrina behaved too much like a ruler. She balanced terror and unity. She destroyed when necessary, then built institutions to preserve what remained. Her power did not depend on divine madness or heroic fury. It depended on order. The road east did not begin with war. It began with permission. With Egypt secure behind, Myrina could advance without fearing rear collapse. That single diplomatic decision reshaped the scale of her campaign. Libya was no longer the center. It had become the base. From the Nile, Amazon forces advanced along the long corridors of the ancient world across the open lands of Arabia into disputed territories of Syria toward the pressure points of Asia. This was not a reckless march. It followed paths already traced by commerce, migration, and previous empires. Myrina did not invent expansion. She entered it herself. Here, the nature of her campaign changed again. In Libya, resistance was concentrated. In the east, power was dispersed. Nomadic groups, small kingdoms, port cities, and inland settlements all calculated survival differently. Myrina adapted accordingly. Some resisted. They were quickly defeated. Others surrendered before contact, opening their territories in exchange for autonomy under Amazon rule. Myrina accepted both outcomes, without hesitation. The difference was simple cooperation preserved life. Opposition led to displacement. This flexibility is why her advance did not stall. She did not impose uniform destruction. She imposed uniform control. The further east they went, the more distinctive their tactics became. Amazon forces did not rely solely on infantry assault or siege machinery. Their defining feature was mobility. Cavalry served not just as support, but as the backbone of force. They scouted ahead, cut supply lines, harassed retreating enemies, and secured withdrawal routes when needed. Most decisive was the ability to retreat without disintegration. When resistance became strong, Myrina did not force surrender at any cost. She withdrew on her own terms, lured pursuers, then suddenly reversed direction. Arrows flew backward from galloping horses, striking those who believed the Amazons were fleeing. Later generations would call this tactic mythical. In Myrina's time, it was simply systematically drilled skill. This capability changed the mathematics of warfare. Engagement no longer required committing to total force destruction. Casualties were minimized, momentum maintained. Armies could go further faster without exhaustion. When Myrina reached Cilicia, her reputation had traveled ahead. Here, a different pattern emerged. Local populations did not resist. They voluntarily submitted. Myrina responded not with occupation, but with liberation. She granted them freedom under Amazon protection, binding them not through fear but through interest. This was not idealism. Voluntary submission cost less than conquest and generated fewer rebellions. Myrina understood that power established without bloodshed could still be absolute. From Cilicia, the campaign expanded into Greater Phrygia. This was not just borderland. It was a cultural crossroads saturated with memory, deities, and ownership disputes. Holding this place required more than military presence. It required lasting sustainability. Myrina delivered sustainability through cities. She did not rule Phrygia from a distance. She manifested her power within the land itself. Settlements were established or re-established. Each became a center of control, administration, and identity. Importantly, they were not named after gods or abstract ideals. They were named after women: Mytilene, Syme, Pitane, Priene. Each city bore the name of a female commander who had earned that honor through contribution. This was not symbolic honor. It was clearly expressed delegation. To name a city after a subordinate was to declare that power was transmitted through competence, not bloodline. In this system, loyalty was rewarded with geography. Power became spatial. Empire could be represented on maps. When the Amazon warriors reached the Aegean, their campaign crossed another threshold. Land power confronted sea power. Islands that existed as independent entities now faced a force capable of reaching them. Lesbos fell within Myrina's sphere of influence. So did Lemnos and the coastal regions of Mysia. The shift to maritime movement revealed new risks. Storms showed no mercy. Supply lines became more fragile. Command depended more on coordination than proximity. It was on the open sea that Myrina faced limits no enemy could impose. The storm shattered her fleet. Waves broke formations. Control dissolved into survival. In this moment, the campaign paused, not militarily but narratively. Myrina did not fight. She pleaded. She appealed to the mother of the gods, a divine embodiment older than Olympus, rooted in the same earthly traditions that shaped her world. The storm subsided. The fleet survived. They landed on a deserted island. Myrina did not see this as coincidence. She marked the place. She built a sanctuary. She established rituals. She named it Samothrace, the sacred land. What began as survival struggle became institutionalized. Religion, once secondary in her campaign, was now integrated into it. This mattered. Empires endure not just through force and law, but through shared meaning. By anchoring her power in sacred space, Myrina ensured her power would not only be remembered as conquest victory, it would be remembered as blessed order, not mere imposition. From the marshes of Libya to the Aegean islands, Myrina had now crossed multiple continents. Her army had adapted without disintegrating. Her power had expanded without collapsing. She had built cities, alliances, and cults. She had proven Amazon's strength was not local, temporary, or chaotic, but expansion exposed pressures. Distance complicated command. Diversity complicated loyalty. Success attracted challengers. Power, when extended far enough, begins to contract inward. By the time Myrina's power reached Phrygia and the Aegean islands, the Amazon Empire no longer faced conquest problems. Instead, it faced unity problems. Distance increased power. Cities grew faster than trust. Victories accumulated, but so did obligations. This was the price of permanence. The network, Myrina, built cities named after commanders, garrisons holding strategic corridors, religious centers binding loyalty functioned efficiently as long as expansion momentum continued. But expansion is one-directional pressure. Eventually, there would be nowhere to go without colliding with forces that could not be absorbed. That collision came from the north. Beyond the settled territories existed societies forged by continuous warfare. Thracians and Scythians tempered by mobility, not governed by cities, led by those who understood alliance was the key to survival. Unlike previous opponents, they did not wait to be isolated. They reorganized. Mopsus of Thrace was first. A general exiled by King Lycurgus, he carried both grievance and experience. He had learned how concentrated power could fail when supply lines were disrupted, when confidence replaced caution. Sipylus of Scythia joined him, another deposed leader, another man with nothing left to preserve but victory. Together they assembled a force designed not to confront Amazon terror, but to endure it. This alliance mattered because it reflected Myrina's own methods. They did not rely on walls. They did not depend on a single city. They moved, coordinated, and chose terrain carefully. For the first time, Myrina faced an enemy not panicked by her army's appearance. The Amazon Empire was now clearly manifest. Its roots were known, its cities mapped, its dependence on cavalry understood. The reputational advantage began to fade. Myrina recognized the danger. Avoiding engagement would preserve her army, but weaken her authority. Withdrawal would trigger rebellions across territories unified by belief in invincibility. She could not let the empire appear hesitant. She chose confrontation. Two armies clashed in major battle, the kind Myrina had once forced others to fight on her terms. This time, terrain did not belong solely to her. The Northern Alliance held ground. They withstood cavalry charges without collapsing. They answered mobility with mobility pressure, with patience. The battle did not end quickly. It ground on persistently. Casualties mounted on both sides. For the first time, Amazon discipline faced an opponent unmoved by panic or concern. When the final defensive line failed, it was not because Myrina lacked courage or leadership capacity. It was because the system she built had reached its limit. Empire needed victory to prove its scale. Defeat immediately collapsed it. Myrina fell on the battlefield surrounded by core forces. Her death was not tragic. It was an ending. With her, the cohesion that bound commanders, cities, and campaigns also vanished. What happened next was not a single collapse, but a chain reaction. Without Myrina, no center strong enough to establish order over such distances remained. Garrisoned units held briefly, then negotiated or fled. Allies recalculated. Cities built on loyalty were now isolated. The Northern Alliance did not stop at victory. They continued pursuit. Survivors of Amazon conquest were pushed south and west, pursued along the paths that once brought them to these lands. Along the way, previously suppressed groups rose up. Old hatreds resurfaced. Female power, once consolidated by Amazon presence, evaporated in their absence. When the surviving remnants reached Libya, there was nothing left to reclaim. The ecosystem that once sustained Amazon movement, the Tritonus marshes, the fertile lands around Hespera, had begun changing. Earthquakes, water displacement, and desertification erased the landscape itself. Empire did not just collapse. Its foundation disappeared. By the time later Greeks began telling stories about Amazon warriors, they had misplaced them in the timeline. They pushed them north toward the Black Sea, toward the edges of their own heroic age. That displacement was convenient. It made the Amazons contemporaries of Achilles and Theseus, figures who could be defeated, recounted, and kept safely in epic. Myrina did not fit there. According to Diodorus, her world appeared much earlier. By the time the Amazons of Thermodon appeared in Greek memory, Myrina's lineage had vanished, leaving only fragments and names without context. That gap matters. It explains why Myrina carries a mythical air even in ancient sources. She belonged to a period before Greek chronology was formalized, before the Trojan War became the marker for arranging the past. Her disappearance was not a mystery of defeat. It was the result of timing. She ruled before stories knew how to record someone like her. This was not coincidence. By the logic of Greek narrative, powerful female forces do not naturally disappear. They must be definitively destroyed to restore balance. The Amazon collapse reaffirmed a familiar order. Male alliances defeated female rule. Cities returned under patriarchal control. Memory was reshaped to fit expectations. Yet erasure remained incomplete. Myrina did not completely vanish. Her cities kept their names. Her routes became trade paths. Her sanctuary at Samothrace endured its mysteries transmitted long after her armies departed. Most importantly, her death did not lie at mythology's edges but near its center. Long after her empire collapsed, Homer found a great mound before Troy's walls. Mortals called it Batiaea. The gods called it by another name, Sema Myrines, Myrina's tomb. It stood there not as myth but as land, a physical landmark on the most recounted battlefield in Greek memory. Hector's forces would later rally near it. Achilles would rage within sight of it. The Trojan War unfolded in the shadow of a woman who ruled before any of them. That placement was not coincidental. It was discomfort preserved in geography. The Amazons of Troy could be killed. They could be admired, then erased. But Myrina could not. She had reshaped the map. The only way to manage her legacy was to bury it under newer stories. But burial does not equal forgetting. Homer mentions the mound only once without explanation. It rises from the Trojan plain, separate from other earthworks manifestly present, ancient, already very old, even in the age of heroes. Mortals call it Batiaea. The gods, Homer says, call it Sema Myrines, Myrina's tomb. No backstory is told. No praise. No warning. Just a name placed quietly where it cannot be ignored. That silence was intentional. By the time the Iliad took shape, Myrina's world had vanished. Her cities still existed, but stripped of origin. Her sanctuary at Samothrace still thrived, but the founder had sunk into mystery. Her empire existed only as remnants, place names, beliefs, mounds whose meaning had faded through repetition. Greek memory did not deny her. It displaced her. This is how inconvenient power gets neutralized, not through erasure but through misplacement. Later legends moved the Amazon story to Thermodon, to a safer setting where they could arrive in time to die at Troy. Penthesilea appeared, fought brilliantly, but fell before Achilles. The story ended neatly. Female power entered epic only to be extinguished by a male hero, whose victory restored balance. Myrina did not fit that structure. She did not arrive to be defeated. She came too early. She built too much. She won too often. And when she finally fell, it was not by a single hero, but by an alliance, resisting an empire grown too large to tolerate. That kind of power could not be neatly resolved within epic scope. It had to be shifted into prehistory. The result was a centuries-long historical distortion. Amazons became legends of the periphery, strange, inverted, and ultimately doomed. Their original image, rooted in Libya and spanning continents, was narrowed into footnotes preserved by writers like Diodorus, who drew on sources already old and fragmentary in his time. But fragments accumulate, and they all point the same direction. Archaeology now confirms what myth tried to hide. Across the Eurasian steppe, women are found buried with weapons, horses, and battle wounds. Their skeletons show stress from horseback riding combat injuries. In the Sahara, rock carvings depict female archers in lands once green and inhabited. In the Caucasus, elite women were buried with maces, daggers, and regalia, signifying power, not exception. These are not fantasies. These are data points. What they suggest is not that Myrina ruled exactly as described, but that the world capable of producing her was real. Societies where women fought, commanded, and ruled did exist. Some thrived. Some collapsed. All were later recorded by cultures that did not inherit their structures. Memory, like power, follows systems. Greek historiography developed in patriarchal city-states, where legitimacy was defined through male lineage and civic participation. Within that logical framework, a woman could be dangerous, talented, even admirable, but never foundational. Myrina's story challenged that very framework, so it was pushed back, blurred, and eventually treated as prelude rather than precedent. Yet the mound remained. Its location matters, not in Libya, where geographic distance could be dismissed, but at Troy, the center of Greek myth, the pivot of heroism, suffering, and fate. Placing Myrina there was acknowledging something quietly subversive before the war that shaped Greek memory. Another order of power once existed. An order not led by those whose names dominate the epics. The gods still remembered her name, even when mortals hesitated to speak it. That difference is the final clue. In myth, gods do not forget what threatens the structures mortals depend on. They rename it. They preserve it in altered form. Sema Myrine's was not celebration. It was acknowledgement without incorporation. Myrina did not beg to be remembered. She did not leave speeches, laws, or epics. She left cities, beliefs, roots, and a tomb that stubbornly anchored itself on the most recounted battlefield of the ancient world. Her legacy was not heroism. It was the disruption of rules. If Amazons existed before Troy, then the Trojan War was not the beginning of large-scale power in Mediterranean imagination. It was reaction to a world already shaped by forces later storytellers wanted to forget. If Amazons ruled before being killed, then their deaths were not origin but ending. And that changes everything about how to look at it. The question is not whether Myrina was real. The question is why history only tells Amazon stories at the moment they were destroyed. Why female power is only mentioned when it can be safely defeated. Why competence is only remembered when it fails. Because remembering Myrina clearly would mean acknowledging that power is not naturally tied to gender. That systems, not bodies, determine who rules, and what appears to be myth might be the remnant of a history too unstable to preserve intact. In life, Myrina forced the ancient world to respond to her. After her death, the response continued, quieter, more strategic, buried under epic stories and time, but not complete. The mound remains, the names persist, and the silence around her is still one of the clearest clues we have. Not from absence, but from deliberate forgetting. History often presents itself as neutral, but in practice, it is selective. It elevates some paths into inevitability and narrows others into anomaly. Myrina's fate lies precisely at that boundary. Not erased, not preserved, but contained. The pattern is consistent. Female power appears early, spreads wide, then weakens. When it returns, it appears in limited form, a queen who must die, a warrior who must fall, a challenger who proves the order she threatens by failing before it. Penthesileia's death is remembered in detail. Myrina's life is summarized as scattered details. This is not coincidence. It reflects how historical memory self-stabilizes. Myrina's campaign described a recognizable logic mobility, driven by ecosystem power consolidated through terror and administration, legitimacy secured through diplomacy, cohesion maintained through delegation. None of this is fantasy. It belongs to statecraft. Her collapse followed familiar logic: overextension, alliance, resistance, loss of central authority, environmental transformation. Empires collapse this way repeatedly. The Amazons of Libya were not exceptional. They were an early case. The discomfort does not come from what Myrina did, but from who she was while doing it. Greek and Roman history inherited a world already shaped by patriarchal norms and coded them as natural law. Within that framework, Myrina's success became a problem to be solved through narrative. If female rule once worked at scale, then male dominance was not destiny. It was a choice reinforced through force and memory management. So memory adjusts. Myrina is depicted but not centered. Her victories are recorded but not celebrated. Her death is acknowledged but not dramatized. Even when Homer places her tomb at Troy, he does so indirectly, acknowledging her without letting her disrupt the epic's focus. This is how power gets neutralized after it can no longer be physically destroyed. So the question is not why Myrina disappeared, but why later history needed her. If she ruled before Troy, then the heroic age was not the beginning of power. It inherited a world already tested by it. If Amazon states rose and fell before Greece's defining war, then Greek dominance was not foundation. It was sequential inheritance. One system among many, not the starting point. That rearrangement does not just disturb myth, it destabilizes authority. This is why Myrina's legacy matters so much. Not because it rescues Amazons as symbols, but because it exposes how historical memory functions as a form of control. Who gets to be ancestral? Who gets to have complexity? Who must be simplified or deferred into legend? Myrina does not offer lessons about virtue or caution. She offers lessons about competence. She organized. She adapted. She ruled. She failed not because she was female, but because no empire survives exceeding its limits. Yet memory of her is preserved as if gender were the cause. Therefore, the silence around her is not a void. It is a signal. History remembers what it needs to justify itself. It forgets what threatens that justification. Myrina threatened it by existing too effectively, too early, too broadly. She did not ask to be remembered. She built structures that forced remembrance even when historical narratives resisted. Cities, cults, roots, and a tomb placed at the center of epic space. These were not coincidences. They were remnants of power. If we ask why Amazons only appear in history when they die, the answer is not that they lacked longevity. It is that their survival disrupted the story being told. Myrina's world did not vanish because it failed. It vanished because other systems replaced it and then controlled the record of that replacement. What remains is the history of work that was erased. To see Myrina not as a strange mythical figure, but as a ruler operating in a real, unstable, competitive ancient world. To recognize that power is learned, structured, and transferable, and its gender is determined less by nature than by which stories are allowed to survive. The mound remains. Not to prove legend, but to prove a decision made long after Myrina's death, to remember just enough, no more, no less. The story ends where it began, not in Libya, not in myth, but in memory. Myrina did not leave an epic written in her voice. She left infrastructure, cities that functioned smoothly, routes connecting regions, sanctuaries that outlasted the armies that built them, a tomb placed where history must step over it again and again. That is why remembering her clearly is so dangerous. Empires prefer founders who can be admired without being imitated, heroes who die cleanly, enemies who prove the order's rightness by failing before it. Myrina had none of those features. She ruled competently. She ruled across cultures. She adapted faster than her rivals. And when she fell, it was because she pushed power to its maximum limit, not because she misunderstood it. History did not erase her. It reframed her. It delayed her appearance. It mentioned her name only when necessary, and never long enough to ask what her existence meant. But silence still carries implications. If Myrina ruled before Troy, then female power was not reaction but precedent. If Amazon states rose and fell before Greek epic began, then the world never waited for heroes. It was already contested, already structured, already shaped by rulers later traditions did not want to inherit. Myrina does not ask us to admire her. She asks us to notice what was left out so later stories could seem more inevitable. And once you notice that the silence no longer feels empty, it starts to sound intentional.